everybody. Hi, Charlene. And hi, Dr. Tom. How are you doing?
I am doing fine, Karl. How are you?
Pretty good. We almost had a bit of a false start there because we were talking before the stream, and I was going to start the talk, and I had forgotten to start the stream, so that would have been rather weird.
It's a lot of dead air.
Yeah, I see that Quiz Train has joined us. Good to see you. So, Tom, what are we talking about today?
So, uh, boy, what aren't we talking about today? So I guess we're sort of talking about world building, and as Karl said, sort of world building with a capital W, and world building with a small W. Um, and what's the difference, and why do we care? Um, so there's that sort of aspect to it, and I have no prescriptions for world building. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the issues that I've run into and how I managed to work around them. But then, and I know Karl wants to pick my brains on this. Uh, I have my own world that I have built, and since it happens to be a pseudo historical one, Karl's interested in it. So
Yeah,
I'm going
no
to talk
kidding.
about that a little bit and uh, sort of why I took the tack that I took, because I think that's one of the really important things is that you don't just go out and build a world. It's you being interested in doing something that ends up being a world. So, yeah, that's pretty much what it's going to be. So hopefully we'll get a lot of comments and questions, and everybody's been either a DM or a player or both. So, everybody's opinions are absolutely valid. This is not a how-to, you know. I would not presume to do that.
I see that Dungeon Matron has joined us. Hi, Lisa. And she's already started world building today, so the stream hasn't started yet, and it gave me an idea for a required tattoo that burns when citizens break city laws or try to escape. That
Well,
is,
been done.
yeah, that is a cool concept.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the subject is pretty big, so where would you like to start?
Um, well, let's talk, I guess, a little bit about sort of the the way that I think most people approach it. And
Hmm.
I'm sure people are going to get tired of me. I'm sure they're already tired of me invoking Tolkien, but since that's the ultimate source for sort of the way that the hobby looks at things, even though it's obviously been completely modified over the decades, um, you end up in a situation where basically you have a map, beautiful map, um, and you have a quest. And those are like the most basic building blocks that most people have in mind um, when they have decided to not just build a world, but then to have somebody do something in it. Um, and luckily, we've kind of gotten away from that because I find that rather, restrictive. But that's where the whole thing sort of started. There's a map that tells you where things are, and then there's a goal. Um, so I guess you need to again draw a major distinction between the fact that Tolkien was doing that, but writing for a literary audience, and a game is not a literary audience.
Uh,
And so you end
okay.
up in a situation where if you follow what he did and what others, I'm not going to put all the blame on him, but if you follow what other peoples have done, specifically writers, you're sort of selling yourself short in a way. So um, there are also people who just like the idea of building worlds. Uh, they find it fun to create those structures, however those structures come into being. Uh, I have a couple of friends who I know of at least one person, let's put it this way, who has constructed more than 10 worlds, all just based on, I wonder what would happen if I tried to do this.
Okay.
They are not playable worlds, but he is a world builder. Um,
Okay. How would you, what's the line where you would say, okay, this is a playable world, this is not a playable world?
well, I mean, his intention was not to build a playable world. In other words, he wasn't doing it for an audience or for participants. He simply wanted to create a, a structure. In that sense, it's kind of, in a weird way, it's sort of more like a literary work.
Hmm.
Although obviously literary works are there for readers, but it's not like readers immediately, as you're writing it, come back to you and go, that's wrong. You shouldn't do it that way. You may get that in a review, but you don't get that while you're writing it. Um, so no, he just liked the idea of sketching this out and saying, how do the politics work? What are the religions? Blah, blah, blah. But there's no feedback. His joy is in building the world.
Okay.
Okay. Um, but that's not the business that we're in, right? We're in the business of building a world so that other people can interact with it. And that is a very, very different thing for a variety of reasons. So um the way that I think about this, and we'll come back to this when I talk about Northlands, is that I perceive a game world as three levels. So level one is sort of the mass assumptions and conditions. So it would be things like, I don't know, weather patterns. It would be geography, but in the
Okay.
in the grossest sense, like, is it a world that's primarily land? Is it a world that's primarily water? Where is on the continental level, where are things in relationship to each other? It might be about political structures, but only at the very highest level. Level three, you'll notice I skipped level two. Level three is the day-to-day life. It's what most players will be dealing with as they adventure. It's going into a city. It's, I don't know, going shopping. I hate going shopping, real life and in the game. So, but that's a day-to-day sort of thing. What is that? What kind of trees are they? You're in a forest. What kind of trees are they? Is there a lot of undergrowth? It's that sort of that level. It's what you really might think of as the details. On the other hand, there's level two, and level two is what I conceive of as sort of the the negotiation zone. This is where your higher level assumptions, the things that in a lot of ways you are interested in, uh, get negotiated with the players as they, go to the city, fight something, whatever. This is where all the flexibility is. And ultimately, this is sort of where, in a very real way, the world gets built. Either through the player's actions or through your reaction to their actions.
So is that when the players start asking, okay, is there this thing, is there that thing, and you start filling in the
And
blanks in
how
between?
do things connect? How do things
Hmm.
interact? As opposed to just there's a bad thing in front of me, I'm going to kill it.
Okay.
Okay. So that's what I always aim for. Is I aim for some level of flexibility in level two, right? Um, it's not easy to do. It's really, really easy. And I know when I first started to do this, I completely fell into the I'm going to build a world. And I mean, I build detailed worlds, you know. See, this is, and again, not a surprise. If you're a historian, you you get into that kind of thing. That's the real trap, you know. Um, you have details at your fingertips. You can do anything you want. You can either steal it straight from history or you can use it, use something by analogy. So it's very, very easy to overdo the world.
Uh,
And I've
Sorry.
always felt that I'm sorry.
Apologies for the explosions in the background.
I mean, I think that what you were really shooting for is you want a world that is largely unknown rather than one that is completely known.
So you're aiming more for a kind of framework that the story can grow into rather than a framework that guides the story, kind of thing.
Absolutely. And not just that, but I mean, this is going to sound strange, but in a sense, the level 3 stuff doesn't really matter. It's really the ramp up to getting into level 2,
Hmm.
where the players start to understand what's going on around them, where they can start to, in some ways, predict what's going to happen, but they could be wrong. That's up to you as the DM, right? Um, so at the back of all of it, like the backdrop in a theater, there's sort of the level 1 stuff. There's the huge stuff, and that is stuff that you don't compromise. That's uh, because consistency is so important. If you want immersion, you have to have consistency. Um, so those things have to stay the same. You have to be aware of them all the time. But as people start to come out of level 1 and look around them, uh, they become aware of those things, at least to some degree. Weather actually becomes more important. You get people saying, wait, but it's winter. Aren't winter voyages dangerous? And you're like, yeah, but, are you
If
adventurers enough?
if you have to, you have to.
Exactly. Exactly. So that the 3 levels are the way I like to look at stuff. And it's again, it works for me. And partially it works for me because I'm a trained historian. And I have to find some way to deal with all of the facts that were pounded into my brain over the years. I've got too much. And that tends to be distracting.
Yeah, I find it interesting that I mean, I'm assuming that one, three, and two are the kind of the. I'm guessing you start out with the first level, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but then
Yeah.
there are also people who I'm guessing kind of start with the third level. If I remember
Hmm.
correctly, Professor Dungeon Master is a fan of this one. So basically,
Hmm.
the DM Scott as well, basically plot out the immediate area that you were going to start the adventure in,
Hmm.
and then just expand as you go along.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, and I was funny. I was talking with Lisa about this morning. Scotty DMs in a way that you think there is a world. He's that good of a DM. You think that there's a world because he's so quick off the mark in reacting to stuff that you can't believe that there isn't an underlying structure. But a lot of what he's doing is flying by the seat of his pants. But it's so realistic that it ends up, in a sense, creating a level 3 as he goes along, and a level 2 for that matter. So that's what I'm saying. This is not a prescription. It's just the way that I started to build it because I think like a historian. There's nothing that says that you can't organically grow 2 and 3 out of 1.
No, I think it's more a way of how you look at the same process from different angles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the other part is, remember, you're trying to grow as a DM, and if that path to growth starts with you simply saying, okay, um, I want to just have the most basic adventure. I want a one shot that, you go to the abandoned mill and you go after the goblins that have taken it over. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I mean, that's still fun, but maybe you want to put it into a larger context later. I don't know. Maybe you don't. But my point is that's the way I look at it, and that's the way that I built Northlands. So um, so I guess that leads to something else. Why do I build it like that? Because I'm a historian. If I was an engineer, I would build it differently. If I was an art major, I would build it differently. If I was a pipe fitter, I would build it differently. Um, because hopefully when you build your world, you're putting yourself into it, and it covers stuff that is interesting to you.
I think that probably also answers my next question, which is where do you start? I mean, like, do you start with a landmass? Do you start with, I don't know, the mythology of the world?
Yeah.
There are so many starting points that I'm guessing everyone will pick a different one.
Well, and it's interesting because I think there's no invalid place to start. Um, so one of the things that, and I've never actually done this, but I want to do it at some point, is, and this gets us to the idea of not just world building, but how do you interact with your players, which is that you can build all the worlds you want, and if you don't communicate them with your players, you failed, basically. Um, so many people, I think, start with maps, and uh, I love maps. I think maps are great. Maps are also restrictive, though. Maps tell you where things are. You can't move them around. So, it, and it's also very hard unless you hand out a map to your players for them to get a feel for it. Now, we're now in a situation where, everybody can have a map of the Sword Coast. Okay. But in the pseudo medieval world that, most of the adventures in D&D take place, nobody had a map.
I
You know,
mean, what
what
maps
they
there were
had
would
was,
be very expensive.
yeah, well, I mean, the only map you would ever see is like if you went to, I don't know, Hereford Cathedral, or maybe I think Salisbury has one too. But anyway, it's a mappa mundi. It's a religious map of the world. So Jerusalem is the center, and it takes its clues from that. It's not about where things actually are.
It's more of a symbolic map, more like a
Yeah,
piece of art rather than an actual thing you need to. Okay, I have to go that
yeah,
way and then that way.
yeah, exactly. It's like here, this is a representation of the way we look at the world from a religious point of view. It's not about geography. Um, so in the medieval period, what people did was they had sort of the land equivalents of what people may actually have heard of, which are called portolans.
Yep.
And a portolan was a book of essentially sketches of the coastline. And if you were a mariner, you would carry a portolan that would say you go from, because you didn't want to go out to sea because then you have no landmarks, and you couldn't figure out your longitude. Um, but it would tell you to go from like this headland to this headland, and if the wind is good, it will take you this long. It's They had those for trips on land as well.
Yeah,
Um,
and
but they don't tell you
here you
how
can find
far any.
water, here you can find this. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And it was like you will find, a Benedictine abbey that you can stay at. Um, if you walk all day, you should be able to get there. But it's not about mileage or anything like that. So, um, in fact, the closest modern analog, and this I suppose won't help non-Americans, but is that the AAA, the Automobile Club, will create what they call a trip map, which is a little booklet for your trip that chops it up into segments and shows you what your route is on the roads. So it's not a big map. It's just where you need to go.
Kind of like the directions that Google Maps gives you, like go there for 10 minutes and then turn that way and
It's kind of like that, only it's even more linear.
okay.
Because at least on Google Maps, you tend to be looking at a larger area. This
Okay.
is like you don't need to go anywhere outside of
This is
this.
literally the list of
That is
directions. Yeah.
it.
Okay.
This is you want to get to you're going to get from A to B. We're not going to show you anything that isn't on the way from A to B, right? So that's the way that you traveled in the Middle Ages, or you just ask directions all the time.
Okay.
So
I see that Lisa has raised another point. Idea. A big wealthy city has a map library where, for a fee, you can make rubs of the raised bronze maps of different areas. I think that could be a thing, but then I would raise you
yeah,
another question. Are you even able to read the map?
right. Well, there's been some studies recently that showed that literacy was actually much higher than we used to think it
Mhm.
was.
But in the sense that map reading isn't a skill
Not
that comes
something you're
naturally.
born
Yeah.
with.
So
Yeah.
something you have to learn. So that would be an extra skill you would have to learn for that. Which again
Yeah.
is also part of the world building. Like, where did you learn the skill? Why? How does that fit into the world? Yeah.
Well, first of all, you have to get used to the idea. Now you have to have this situation where there are libraries,
Yeah.
you
As
know?
Eric Clinton
So
say, yeah,
yeah,
libraries where you
it's
can
sort
rub
of
one
like
out.
the whole thing about how do you become a millionaire? And the answer is first you get $1 million,
Okay.
you know. Um, but I think the idea of raised bronze maps, that's really interesting because obviously, doing rubbings on gravestones that have brass inlays, it's practically literally a cottage industry in places. So that would actually be kind of interesting. And of course, they did them in tile too. You'll find, especially in monasteries, you'll find the Mappa Mundi, the religious oriented maps. You'll find those in tile on floors in monasteries
Kind of like
sometimes.
a mosaic.
Yes,
Ah,
exactly. So it's not that they didn't really have the concept. It's like, okay, we understand that you can pictorially represent what's going on. Um, but for whatever reason, they didn't take it to the next step.
to be fair, I mean the I think sextants and things like that weren't and chronometers weren't available at the time, so making precise measurements might have been a problem. Plus, if you got stuff like topographical maps, those weren't available until you had, accurate topographical maps. You need aircraft
Yeah,
or balloons or
accurate
something like that.
surveying
Yeah,
equipment. Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing is, and yet somehow the Romans managed to build absolutely straight roads between major cities. You know, but again, it kind of depends on, again, we said pseudo medieval,
hmm,
right? Depends on when you're talking about in the Middle Ages,
yeah.
or even if you're not talking about the Middle Ages. You know, since in D&D the Middle Ages goes to about 1700. So.
Plus, you've got magic and stuff that it's going to change
Mhm.
the availability of stuff.
Yep. Yep. I mean, well, I'll get into that when I talk about Northlands. But anyway, uh, the sort of the general idea of okay, how do we know what we know is, I think, something you need to think about at level one.
How do we know what we know? Okay, elaborate.
Well, so I'm going to get back into talking about the Dark Ages, which I think, nobody should say the Dark Ages because it wasn't particularly dark. Um, wasn't great, but wasn't dark.
If only there was a
So
stream that talks about it.
yeah, who I know it's like some great secret. Um, so the idea that, again, like one of the classics is, oh, the Roman Empire fell in 476. Well, it didn't, obviously, and we know the Byzantine Empire went on for another 1,000 years. But even in the West, you know, a lot of the so-called barbarian tribes had been in contact with the Roman Empire for a couple of hundred years, and they just took over as best they could Roman administration structures. So it isn't like it just disappeared or anything, right? So um, that's a whole nother issue. I think we need to get into that. But the question of, okay, did it really, all of this knowledge, did it really only get rediscovered in the Renaissance? Was there direct transmission? And again, as we're finding out, no, it seems like there were several sort of spurts of transmission, right? So as you're setting up your world, you need to think about not just now, but also then. What happened before this? How did they get to where they are? See, yes, it's the Roman Empire again. Absolutely. Um, all roads lead to Rome. Actually, all roads also lead, but it's a road, so all roads also lead away from Rome. Nobody ever says that. If you need to get out of town, there's a road for you to get on. Um, so if you're going to build a world, you end up by implication building its history as well. And, you don't have to go into detail, but you're going to end up especially if you're talking about people adventuring in ruins and stuff like that. You're dealing with the history of that world, even if you didn't plan to. So I just started at the other end, basically. Um,
Okay.
and one of the things I think that we tend to forget is that we talk about the Romans, we forget that they had access to almost the entire corpus of uh, of Greek literature and
Mhm.
writing, and that in turn the Greeks actually made a concerted effort to get as much uh, Egyptian stuff as they could. Uh, they also went after some of the Phoenician stuff because, well, that was an obvious that was an obvious jump because the Greek alphabet is largely derived from the Phoenician alphabet. But um, when Alexander conquered most of the, I was going to say known world, there were lots of it was known, but just not to them. He grabbed all the stuff that was in the Persian imperial libraries. So there is an awful lot of stuff that gets funneled through, and literacy in a place like Alexandria was probably much, much, much higher than we used to think it was. Not just because of the library. Most guys aren't going to the library, but they think that maybe literacy could have been as high as 30% in Alexandria among adult males. There's always that caveat. Um, so that is obviously it went down during the Middle Ages, but it didn't plummet like we used to do. So there were always people writing. There were always people at the most basic level who could
I recall
who
from
could
when
communicate.
we last talked about this, you mentioned that we're even talking at the level of common Americans who at least need to be able to take down their stock and
Mhm.
creditors and debtors. So it's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
down to zero.
yeah. I mean, and I think part of it is or part of our perception there is that we understand that people used their memory a lot more, and they did, but that doesn't mean they stopped writing things down. You know,
Mm, do you think there's also kind of a bias, like let's put it this way, just before because people aren't writing books that come to us today, doesn't mean that they're not literate. And even today, I think most of the writing produced is probably administrative stuff.
yeah, yeah. No, I think that's right. I think that's right. Um, you know, it literacy is a weird thing because I've run into situations where people have said, "Oh, she signed with her mark, therefore she was illiterate." Well, it doesn't mean that at all. It means she couldn't write, or it means she could write, but not well, and did not want to disgrace herself by writing badly on like a formal legal document. Um, the ability to read is also different from the ability to write. And there's a fair amount of evidence that more people could read than could write. So uh, that's kind of one of the things I suppose that comes into play when we talk about the level three stuff is what's the level of literacy? Does everybody walk around and, you know, reading? I don't know. Maybe they, get their maybe they get their news from something that's posted, a broadside or something like that, where it wasn't that reading was impossible, it was that printing was expensive or copying was expensive and time consuming. So Joe Blow wasn't going to walk around with a copy of the Bible, even though religion was very important to them. Uh, but you could go and hear somebody read parts of it. So literacy is just another one of those things that I think you can throw into a campaign. You don't really have to make a big deal out of it. It's just there in the back of your head, you know?
Ah, yeah, that is a very
Um,
good point because yeah, job boards are kind of a staple in role playing games.
yeah, no, absolutely. It's just early LinkedIn. That's all it is, you know? Absolutely seriously.
Yeah, no, no, it's true. It's
That's all it is, hey, look, this was posted on a board. It just happens to be electronic rather than, you know. I mean, the advantage of LinkedIn is, you can post your resume at the same time so that it's easier. But that's really all it is. It's not a demonstration that you're particularly good at what you do. It just says, "Hi, I'm here. I'm available."
yeah.
You know. Um,
Okay.
so and actually, I was thinking about this, Karl, for the Four Horsemen, which is I think that the Four Horsemen, which is was Karl's adventure in Easy D6, um, which is set during the 30 Years' War, um, actually follows the level one, two, three structure,
Does it? Right.
uh, but in a completely different way than the way I would do it. Because you have level one. Level one is just the 30 Years' War and that horrible situation, right? And you don't really have to go into any detail with your players about it. You don't, it's just like you're in the middle of the single most destructive war in Europe before the World Wars. That's
Plus,
where you are.
the player characters would not know much outside of what's going on outside of a 20-mile radius at the outside.
Exactly. See, now you're in level three, right? And the reason is that level two is the Holy Roman Empire, which nobody understands, which nobody can explain. There's over 300 sovereign principalities within the Holy Roman Empire. You know that. You're at level one. You know that. You enjoy that. You probably snicker while you're DMing it. It's great. And then as people go from, wrong wrong period, but as they go from like some Imperial Knights land, if it's Guts von Berlingen, and they go from that to the free city of Nuremberg, that has meaning for you. You're getting something out of that, right? But now you have the chance for one of them to say, "Wait, I don't get it. This is different." And that's the point at which somebody approaches level two and is like, what's really going on here? Because, Nuremberg is a city. It isn't just that we went from the countryside to a city. It's that the rules seem to have changed. The situation seems to have changed.
The laws have
Um,
changed. It's like being in a different country, pretty much. Yeah?
Absolutely. And if you get a player who suddenly kind of goes, I wonder what that's about, you've hit level two. And when somebody hits level two, that is frankly for me a real charge up. I like that. Because it means they're immersed enough that they aren't lost in the moment.
Okay, so again, the levels are kind of like a level of understanding that the players get.
Yeah,
How,
yeah,
how well they understand the whole world, kind of thing.
yeah. Because it's a voyage. That's what I want is for the whole thing to be a voyage of discovery. You know, if you if you took Joe Blow and said, "Here, you're in the middle of the 30 Years' War," they're going to know jack about it. They're probably going to go, "Did it last for 30 years?" And you're like, I if you like the 30 Years' War, you're probably going to say something like, "Well, technically, yes, but," right? But you can't do that with a player who knows nothing about it because they'll just stare at you and their eyes will glaze over, and rightfully so. But gradually, as you're in your ninth session of playing, when suddenly a Spanish army appears on the Spanish road, and they're like, "Why are the Spanish here?" Now you're in level two, basically. Um, so I think that level of communication, that um, that bringing players into the world demands two things. One is it demands that you have something that you can bring them into, and two, it demands that there's space for them to be brought in.
Mhm. Which means that you need that flexibility that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, in the meantime, Eric Clements was saying I usually start a new world with a timeline, which is interesting. I've done it before. It's just I haven't really done any capital W world building in a very long time.
It's an interesting thing because you would think that a timeline. I guess it depends on the timeline, and this is something that uh, this is something that it took me a while to get during grad school, which is dates are not important. Or I should say, dates are just a method of measurement. What is important is their relationship is that they mark an event, and that event has relationships to other events. It's not the date. The date is pointless. The one caveat that I'll say is if a date is expressed as, AD or something like that, you can make certain assumptions about the person who's dating it, right? But in a game function, no, it doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah, you just have to make sure that the chains of cause and effect are in place.
Exactly. Or not even cause and effect,
Mhm.
but just because because you may be dealing with an event that's here, there is no cause and effect with this event here, but somewhere down the line, they can both feed into something else that happened.
Aha, okay.
Okay. So if you do a timeline, the worst thing you can do is lock yourself in because inevitably I'll give you an example from literature. Um, when Isaac Asimov was writing both his Robot series and his Foundation series, he wrote them as totally separate things. They were not originally connected.
Okay.
Late in life, he decided, for whatever reason, that it would be a really good thing to connect them. And so he spent the remainder of his life writing stuff, lots of other stuff too, but writing stories that would connect those two things. Um, so he couldn't go outside the lines because there was just one line.
Okay.
Think of it as the whole Star Wars thing and the debacle of the sorry if somebody liked them, but the debacle of the prequels. You know where they're all going. Where's the sense of discovery? This is always the problem with prequels, is that they end up being just about characters, and if the characters aren't good, then you're lost because the plot has to go to a certain place.
Yeah, I mean the Asimov cinematic universe problem.
Yeah, yeah. So if I do a timeline, I do it as a relativity rather than specific points in time. So in Northlands, I could not tell you a single date in Northlands, including the one where that starts the whole thing. Could not tell you when it is. I could tell you roughly when it is, but I have no year for it. So
But do you keep some kind of measurement, like say, for example, this happened a long, long ass time ago and a long time ago and recent? Just
yeah,
a
I know the
rough
whole
measure kind of
zone
thing.
idea. The zone idea
Hmm.
is kind of important, and I like using it, but depending on how noodly you get about what's going on, you kind of do have to assign a sort of well, this happened in this decade, or certainly this century. Um, but I don't worry about dates. By the
Ah,
way, I think that's actually the whole idea of not worrying about dates is something that history grad students tell themselves to take some of the pressure off. But I can also tell you that when you take your PhD exams, they ask you for exact dates. So we're all just fooling
no.
ourselves. Yeah, not good. I used to sit up in the middle of the night in my sleep and start rattling off things like that.
Yeah. Okay, Cosmortrain is saying, when writing an adventure, I start out with the BBG motivation and what would help or hinder their goals. Which is interesting. It's like character-driven world building kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I mean, it depends on how you want to build it. Again, there's nothing since you're starting with characters and they need to have goals. There's nothing wrong with starting that way. Why not? You know, I guess that my point would be that I would hope that it would then get beyond those goals. The problem is that D&D is not problem. It's just the way it is. D&D, and we talked about this a little bit last time with things like Fancy and Magic,
Mhm.
is that it's all very task oriented. The structure of it is extremely task oriented. You will go here, you will do this. If you go back to OD&D in second edition, you know, world building at that point consisted of drawing the dungeons below a castle. That was pretty much it. I don't have them anymore, but I used to get the smallest the smallest graph paper possible and just fill pages with, you know, tunnels and stuff like that. Never gave a thought to, you know, what was going on above ground, or, you know, you just did that. You just assumed that everybody would want to go in and die, basically. Um, so it's kind of, I like it better now, but sometimes I yearn for the simplicity of the days when we just went in and killed whatever was in front of us.
Yeah, the days of finding unicorns in rooms that had been
Oh,
locked tight for
yeah.
millions of years. Yeah,
Yeah,
live
and then there
unicorns.
would be that moment where you go, "Wait a minute, how can this exist?" And, wait, I don't have time
Magic.
for that. I'm being yeah, magic. Yeah, I'm being attacked by another 1,000 orcs. What I don't have time to worry about these philosophical things. Um, but anyway, the point is that whatever it is that you build is fine, uh, but try to think about, excuse me, some of these larger things. But they will grow organically if you let them.
Yeah, because Martin is saying that it can lead to locations, religions, societal norms, etc. Which is, yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
absolutely,
again, it's
absolutely.
different
Not,
if you're,
not if as a DM you're not open to doing that.
yeah,
That's
that's a good point.
you know, it requires flexibility on your part.
So that's one. And also, there's another question from Ari. How do you manage factions and their agendas? Can they get stuff done between sessions?
So I think that's a really interesting question, because the whole question of factions and agendas is once again, uh, I it's really shorthand, but it is shorthand for, I think, things that happen naturally. It is part of the gaming system. It doesn't reflect reality in that sense. It, as with most of what you'll, you know, buy in a book, it is um, somewhat limiting. I think it calls upon you to identify a faction, to set their agenda, and then basically they seem like they're set in stone. It just makes everything to me more complicated. Now I'm going to say something that's totally ridiculous, and the reverse of that, which is, do you need to label things in order to make it work?
Okay,
And
go on.
that is one of the problems that I have. This is one of the problems, one of the reasons I like homebrew more than anything else, is that homebrew forces you out of the easy, uh labeled, for want of a better word, um sort of structures and definitions that are provided to you. And I think, I while accepting that obviously this is a business for a lot of people as well, and I think there are a lot of people who enjoy modules, campaign settings, whatever. I and just, you know, oh, let's use this optional rule. Now let's use this. Let's use all the optional rules. Um, I don't know. I don't take advantage of them myself. I don't want to take advantage of them myself, because I want to DM in a way that lets me blow apart the box.
Okay, at the same time, I think that factions are a good thing to have in some settings because sometimes you have a faction-shaped hole in the narrative that says, okay, a faction would work really well there.
Hmm. Well,
And
again, they're shorthand. They're shorthand for things.
yeah, but at the same time,
You know.
there's no saying that okay, a faction does not have to be a monolith. You can have
Hmm.
sub-factions, you can have disagreement. You can run an entire campaign and do a lot of world building purely based on one faction.
Hmm. Hmm. And I guess that's part of it is that the way that I usually see factions portrayed is they're really kind of, in a weird sense, mechanical.
Mm.
Sure, you have leaders, you have goals, you have whatever, but they they have always struck me as a literary fiction that is there. I don't want to say as a crutch, but to sort of let you hmm, maybe maybe let you think less about how things actually work. I don't know if that makes sense. But essentially a lot of gaming instructions are about saying, look, you want to accomplish this. Here is a quick and easy way to do it. And that was the original idea for modules was, look, you don't have to do anything. We can just give you a module. You will have an adventure. And yeah, again, personal preference. I've DM'd modules, I've played in billions of modules. But I just find that if I'm going to DM as opposed to play, if I'm going to DM, I would rather not buy a pre-made item because then I have there's two reasons. One is is real life. One is I'm going to have to, if not memorize it, at least get to know it quite well. And I didn't create it, so that's difficult. And then number two is pretty much follows on from the first side, which is I didn't create it. I want to DM something like I created it. I want to be, and there's a very important reason for that. Um, it's not enough to have a module or a campaign setting that is a good one. It's well thought out in the whole bit. If you can't communicate that to your players, and my feeling is always that if you create it yourself, you have a better chance of communicating things to your players.
Well, if it's something that if it's something that's something someone else, so the first thing you have to do before you communicate to anyone else is to communicate to yourself.
Exactly.
So it is an extra step.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as someone who's, you know, as someone who's been forced to read a lot of books and regurgitate them, that's a pain. And personally, I don't want to do it that much. I've been there and I've done that. I would rather take the time to build it myself, to know it, because then I understand it. I don't have to go in and memorize it and then at the key moment go, oh crap, I forgot what's on page 10. Where is that? I know it. And I think I have a better chance of communicating that to the players. Now, there's problems with that too. For instance, you create something, you feel like you own it.
True. Yeah.
This is always a problem. You build the world, you have to be willing to destroy it as well. Um, but because you put a lot of effort into it, you tend to be kind of protective of it.
Speaking of effort, campaign train is saying this is super relevant to me. Currently building a tabletop RPG which will have 32 worlds. Daunting but fun.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Yep.
that's toughy.
Yep.
It's an interesting thing. And the way the brain works is marvelous. But at some point, you're going to be on world number 16 and go, wait, didn't I just do this on number 9? You know. Now, mind you, there's no reason it can't exist on both worlds,
Yeah, fair enough.
but you have to be aware of that.
Okay, in the meantime, Mia Geek is saying She starts out with a single city or town with a couple of temples, notable families, and powerful vendors. So again, the location-based approach we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it doesn't take you that long to actually build a town because you don't have to build a town. You just have to build certain places, and you should be able to, pivot if a player goes, no, wait, I want to go down this alley. If that alley leads to, a decaying temple for a god that is no longer worshipped anymore, you should be able to, handle that without too much trouble. Sure, why not? Yeah. Um, I don't know. It's kind of an interesting thing. It really is just all about your comfort level, you know. But communicating whatever it is that you do build, that's the key because you're not in this alone. You've got to talk to your players and they need to understand what's going on. So a couple of things, um, I guess about it, and I haven't said Tolkien in 10 minutes, so I have to say Tolkien again.
Yeah, it's
So if you if you look at Tolkien's works, and you think of the names in his works, his names are very simple names. They are like one of the longer ones. I'm going to take one of the longer ones. So Lothlorien, right? Now, as we know, if you read the appendices, Lothlorien is actually a shortened version of the original Elvish name. But at least the names that are used consistently throughout the entire narrative are all very similar. They are probably no more than 3 syllables.
So, for
There
example,
are no so like Denethor.
yeah, I was thinking more about
Denethor.
peoples. You have the Galadrim, the Haradrim, the Rohirrim.
Yeah,
So it's always
yeah,
people of the something. Yeah.
right. And there are no silent letters. I guess the one example where you could say there is one is Caradhras, which is, for one, that's more Welsh than anything else. But you actually pronounce the H, and it wouldn't matter if you didn't. If it was just silent, you would still be in the same place. But the point is that his names are extremely accessible. There is never any hesitation. You don't go, wait, how do I pronounce Sam or Frodo or Gandalf? You really have to stretch to come up with something that would make you pause at all. And that may not seem like much, but cumulatively over a game, that's a lot.
Yeah.
If you don't know what the names are, and this is something that I notice every time, if it's a name that is close, and I'm actually going to use um, a name from a game I'm playing in right now. And this is a name that I think is absolutely fine. It didn't bother me. It is a name that is very close to at least 2 other names that are very familiar, and yet nobody called this character by their actual name. It was just dissimilar enough so that people called her other things. So her name was Yanette. So it was spelled Yanette, I think.
So people are confused between Jeanette and Annette
And Yvette.
and Yvette. Okay.
Yeah. So the funny thing about that one is it's simple, but it's positioned in between at least 3 other very simple familiar names.
Okay.
So nobody ever called her by her name.
Okay. But going back to Tolkien, I remember that. Jesus Christ. I was thinking that the simple names were explained in one of the appendices where he says, no, their names were really something long and complicated, but
Right.
for ease of
Oh no,
translation, I'm calling him Sam.
let's put it this way. Remember, Tolkien was not just a linguistic nerd. He was a linguistic nerd at Oxford getting paid to be a linguistic nerd. So if anybody was going to be interested, he was like, oh yeah, you want more? I got more for you. Here's some more. Okay, you swallowed that? Here's more. Right? but in terms of the ones that you actually have to deal with in the narrative itself, they are, and they're not particularly Anglo-Saxon. I will say that you won't find that's sort of the idea that it's all Anglo-Saxon. It's not all Anglo-Saxon, but it's all very simple, and so you always know what people's names are. You know, you know. Well, okay. Here's a great example: the river, the Baranduin. Okay,
Okay.
the hobbits actually call it the Brandywine, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's no reason they can't pronounce Baranduin, but it's slightly off from quote normal speech, from common, right? So it just becomes Brandywine. Um, and if somebody is, but it is close enough so that if a reader reads Baranduin, they know it's the Brandywine. But in a game, as it's going at a frenetic pace, as games frequently do, you just want to call it the Brandywine
Yeah,
because
that's
those
just
are familiar words and syllables. So, tempting as it may be when building a world to build languages because you love Tolkien or whatever, you know, uh, that can create problems for players. You're going to have problems communicating. There's going to be just that little hitch somewhere, and that's one reason why I tend not to like campaign settings and modules that are produced commercially. Is uh, although sometimes they're fine, sometimes the names are like, why are you using that name? That is a name I can't pronounce and will not remember.
yeah. In fact,
Yeah.
Dungeon Matron is saying, I want to name a town just to be a jerk. Lisa,
Well, there is a Zizix Road. Well, a town. Well, there's a place called Zizix in California. It's ZZYZX, I believe. And it was actually named with the idea that it would be last on any list. So, but that element of communication, it's fine to have a world, but you got to be able to communicate it. So another example, which is really for the DM, because that's really for the players. The naming thing is for the players. For the DM, if you're doing a map, and I have my own feelings about maps, but I won't get into it. But if you're doing a map and you create that map, that's probably fine because you've created it. So you know where things are.
Excuse me, Tom, 1 second. There seems to be a problem with the stream. Okay, just let me check something 1 sec.
Sure. You're coming through loud and clear here, so I'm not seeing any problem.
Yeah, it's more about the stream for the people at home. Okay, thanks, Mia. Okay, thanks. Okay, so everything seems to be okay.
Oh, good. Okay.
Just saw some alerts
No
here,
idea
and I
where we
was
were.
like,
Oh, yeah. So in terms of mapping, one of the things that I think I might try to do is this is going to depend on where you are. You can pick any map, but pick something that you know. Like here, if I were to pick a map of the county that I live in, and just erase all the names and all the little streets.
mm-hmm.
And if you're a DM, even if you rename, like if I take the county, okay, so I live in Southern California. So I live in Lakewood. So there's Lakewood. It's on the map. I erase it and call it whatever I wanted to call it. Here's Los Angeles up here. I erase it and call it whatever I want to call it. Okay. And the adventure, whatever, the action takes place in that general area. As a DM, even though you've renamed those towns, you know where everything is.
Mm-hmm.
Your brain will automatically make that connection. And if that helps you in then connecting with your players, that would be a good thing. I don't know. I just thought of that. So it's I haven't done it, but I would love to try that and see how that goes because basically, you just want to have as little sand in the gears of communication
Hmm.
as you can get, and it's a cumulative thing, right? So if you can do the names so that nobody everybody knows, okay, that's that person, I don't have to think about it, not a problem. And if as the DM you instinctively know that, this is Los Angeles and it's here, and I don't know, this is Pasadena and it's here, even if it's got a different name, you feel sort of more grounded and more comfortable. You don't have to refer to your map. You don't have to do anything. You just know where it is.
Yeah,
So
look this.
stuff like, yeah, stuff like that, I think is you experiment with it. As a DM, you should always be experimenting with stuff.
Okay, and we have another comment from Slurgicals. I create an NPC from birth to coming of age, then let the world around that NPC evolve around its story until the NPC fades in the background. Sounds like an interesting way to do it. It's possibly super detailed, but definitely interesting.
Yeah, I was just thinking. I was trying to think the last time I used a module. Um, it seems like it was a long time ago. Uh, hmm. Oops, wait a minute. I just glitched out temporarily. Hold
That's
on.
right.
Okay, back. Sorry about that. Odd. Sorry. Where were we?
Yeah, last one was, let's see. I create an NPC from birth to coming of age, then let the world around that NPC evolve around its story until the NPC fades in the background.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's great. And the other thing is that NPCs can get you to level 2 quickly,
Hmm.
you know. Um, there's you can overuse a lot of NPCs, but there's no doubt they have their purposes. That makes perfect sense to me.
And I think you had started answering another question about whether you can use modules for as a starting point.
I've tried that and I'll be honest, for me it was like the worst of both worlds because I still had to learn the module, but then I had to worry about balance. Like because I didn't feel like I could just add magic as an overlay. Um, I had to really think about, okay, who is this particular character? Um, what would he do? Now, the other thing is that you can certainly it is easier on the other hand, as opposed to inserting magic wherever you feel is appropriate. You can certainly take a module and make it more pseudo historical. That's certainly possible because usually that's just a matter of changing names. Everything has happened at some point in history. So
Okay. Also, to answer the same question about where did it go? About using modules and stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Cannibalize everything. You use bits of this and that and whatever. Now, speaking of the 30 Years' War in particular, it's just it depends on how detailed you want to go. If
yeah,
it's just in the background,
yeah,
then you can do pretty much anything.
yeah. I think. I mean, I still have. Look, I have second edition stuff that I pull from all the time. Um, and not in the sense of, you know, obviously stat blocks are not the same now as they were, but you can use a module as a reference point without any, trouble at all. I think the problem comes when you try to swallow it whole, you know, change it up. That is a lot of work because again, you have to kind of learn the module before you do anything. Um, so um, that kind of leads me into Northlands, if that's okay.
Please do.
Okay, so I years ago when I was thinking, okay, if I really wanted to build a world that that did a couple of things for me, um, what would I do? So that's the point at which I started thinking about things like communication, um, and not reality, because this is not about reality. And what would I have fun DMing that I felt like uh, I wouldn't overcreate. And as you can imagine, if you're a historian, you know way too much about stuff that doesn't matter, and it's very easy to stick these stupid details in that don't help anybody. Uh, so, uh, so I thought about that, and what I came up with was something that is based on it's historical, um, but I distanced myself from history by doing an alternate history. Okay,
Kind of like what if
so
the Roman Empire never fell, kind of thing.
yeah, exactly. Except we're back to the Roman Empire again.
Yes.
I think that makes like four times today. I thought of it. But I didn't want to do it like if you do the Roman Empire, it's just too big. You can't. There's too much to handle. Okay, it sounds great as an idea, but oh my God, there's a lot out there, right? So I didn't want to do that. I wanted to take something relatively simple, but I wanted to tweak it so that I never had the issue of staying true to history, right? Um, so what I came up with was a a a game that is set in about the year 1000, and it's set in an alternate history in which after the Vikings started to expand out of Scandinavia and took over large parts of eastern and northern England, they actually came to a lasting uh, agreement, I guess we'd say, with the Anglo-Saxons. And this largely comes from a trilogy written by a science fiction author named Harry Harrison. And in it, I'm not going to give you the plot or anything, but in it, they're essentially it's set during Alfred. So King Alfred died about 900. Um, uh, Alfred eventually ends up sort of putting Anglo-Saxon England into a codominium with the Viking-dominated parts of England, which are led by a man named, depending on how you want to pronounce it, Chef or Skef or whatever. So, um, but Chef also controls Denmark, Norway, arguably Sweden as well, though that's iffier. Um, and so it is an alternate history that enables me to draw on both Anglo-Saxon history, Scandinavian history, but not have to stay true to either of them. The names are even more familiar now than they were when I started building this because of things like Vikings.
Okay.
You know, um, it is in terms of a map rather than doing this detailed thing. Essentially, what I keep in my head is a map from another game, which is, I don't know if any of you have played this, but I highly recommend it. It originally was one of the Avalon Hill games called Kingmaker,
Okay.
which is set during the Wars of the Roses. So it has this highly schematic sort of map of England, which tends to have it, it's got a few major roads on it, which by the way are all still Roman roads,
Okay.
even at that period, of course. Major cities, major castles, little unfortified towns, some of them, but doesn't over detail anything.
So it gives
Um,
you plenty of empty space to play with in between,
oh,
right? All right.
tremendous amount of space to put things. You can swap things around. It's like, if you're like, oh, I think I want to do a swamp adventure. Well, let's put that in East Anglia. Well, they're not going to East Anglia. Where are they going? Oh, they're going to Lincolnshire. Well, let's put it in Lincolnshire. So you don't really have to worry about things like that. The names are all pronounceable. More than any other country in the world, Americans tend to have at least heard of English places, unless, of course, they're from a particular ethnic background and they're like second generation immigrants. Okay, that's going to be different. But again, you have to go with the tendencies, right? So I wanted to have a world that had the highest possible uh, likelihood of feeling somewhat familiar. But at the same time, I couldn't set it in the year 1000 because then it would be too familiar to me. And
It,
so I would be,
it would kind of force you to railroad yourself, kind of thing.
yes, I
All
would,
right.
I would, my brain would constantly be indexing what was happening in the game with what happened in recorded history. And that's not fair to the players, because you start going, well, that's not what really happened. And it's like, no, no, this is really what's happening in the game. So that's why I did an alternate history. Um, and it means that, to talk about things like the BBEG. Who is the BBEG? I actually don't know. I have played with the idea that there is a Cold War going on with the Holy Roman Empire. Um, I have played with the idea that there is a cult that is attempting to attract an asteroid to smash into the Earth because nothing could be more pleasurable to their god than the total extinction of life. Um, but those are so level one. It's who's ever going to think about that? Certainly, no player who's starting in the
Exactly. Yeah.
game is going to think about that. Yeah. Players can start anywhere in Great Britain. It doesn't matter. Um, you have when I was saying whatever it is going on now, there was clearly stuff going on before. You have those Roman roads still in place as visual reminders of the fact that history was, going on. You have, one of the things that the Scandinavian king, Chef, is big on is reclaiming knowledge. And so one of the first things that he does is he finds in a monastery library a copy of a book, and I know the name of the book, and I keep forgetting it, but it's like by Vegetius or somebody like that. And it is essentially the manual of arms for the Roman legions.
Is that Vegetus?
Yes,
Okay.
but I can't remember the name of it.
I can't.
So
I can't remember. I know the book. I can't remember the name either.
yeah, so he reads that, and he understands, for example, that he can't take Vikings and turn them into legionnaires, but he can take former English slaves of the Vikings and turn them into these units because they will take orders, they will follow instructions, they aren't individualistic and in search of honor the way that the Vikings are. So anyway, point being that the presence is that the past is always present as well. Um, the other thing is that we have just a wealth of knowledge of English folk tales, whether it's, Robin Hood, um, or like one of my favorites, which is The Green Children of Woolpit. Um, there's so many of them. They are so accessible, and you can throw them in anywhere. And sometimes they're just flavor text, and sometimes they are really an issue. Um, so it's I don't feel like I mean I have a level one, right? Which is this sort of overarching situation that this history diverged from ours at some point. But I tend to think more about what has changed. So, for example, um, there was, I don't know if any of you know where Bristol is. It's a port on the west coast of England. Um, it was the central place where uh, cattle that were fattening uh, on the where they were let loose on the moors of like Cornwall and Devon, and then you would actually have cattle drives to Bristol, and the Cornwall was a major tin mining area up into the 19th century. The Phoenicians went all the way to Cornwall for tin. The Romans did. The Byzantines did. Um, and very early on, they figured out that they needed to mark their cattle, and so um, they made essentially branding irons out of tin. Okay, and they would mark their cattle, and then they would take them to Bristol, and somebody would buy them for hides and meat. Um, and the idea is that some bright lad in Bristol got the idea for printing from that.
Okay.
So, you know, obviously not what really happened, but
I can see it working out
yeah,
in
it's
the narrative, though.
reasonable or
Yeah.
it's rational. It's not what really happened, but in terms of getting players to level two, it's a detail that in a sense doesn't really change that much. But can you imagine what it would be like to have printed books in the year 1000? Think about back to literacy, right? Suddenly you no longer have to go to a monastery to find a book. It doesn't take a year to create one.
But what about all those unemployed monks?
Well, oh boy, don't get me too deep into this. Uh, one of the prerequisites for this sort of codominium between the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons is that Scandinavian religion is somewhat more codified, but in a purely practical way. It doesn't have a structure like the English church or like the Catholic Church. Um, and instead, every priest of what they euphemistically call the way um, is sure beholden to a particular god, but they actually have a craft that goes with it. So, as an example, a priest of Ithun, who is a healer god, wears the symbol of Ithun around his neck. It's an apple, and he works as a healer, and that's essentially his job as a priest of Ithun. So it works like that for a lot of the different gods. But the end result is that priests are not seen as they came to be seen later as sort of living off the sweat of others. It removes
There's
a lot of the anti-clerical reasons.
and they're kind of more embedded into the community rather than being something apart. Okay.
Yes, they are deeper into society. There are still Catholic monasteries, but that's made more problematic by the fact that at the point that King Alfred says that the way will be tolerated in his kingdom, he gets excommunicated. So
Whoops.
yeah, oh well. Um, so there is a tendency towards more practicality, I guess, if you can look at it that way. Um, so the result is a somewhat more technologically advanced society than you would get in the real um, in the real timeline, but not ridiculously so. I mean, it's this is all stuff that could have been, and let's put it this way. Movable type had already been invented in China, so it isn't like I'm creating this out of thin air, right?
But no
Um,
airships and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah. So, so, but it means that, for instance, among the Vikings, among the sort of old school Vikings, who you would think would be the ones to oppose, uh, sort of the regularization of Scandinavian society, which is occurring during this period. Those are the people that went to Iceland. Those are the people that went to Greenland. Those are the people that went to Vinland, right? They were trying to get away from centralized power. Um, it means that one of them in particular, his main way of making a living is sacking Irish monasteries, and rather than taking slaves, taking all their books.
Okay.
And that's what he does. He is a book dealer as far as he is concerned. He can't read or write. It doesn't matter. He just gets all the books. And then he takes it to, various places and sells his books. So the whole definition of loot has changed for him.
Hmm.
So, that's pretty much Northlands. It's a way for someone who enjoys history and alternate history to play around with things, while at the same time you can play a game in it because anything goes as long as it's relatively reasonable. You're not going to be held to a standard of truth. You can go anywhere you want. You can do anything you want. I don't even locate adventures on the map. The only There are a few encounters that you're going to have, like session 0 has a specific, encounter, and you will meet the king at some point, just because who wouldn't want to meet a king, you know? But for the rest of it, no, you can go anywhere you want.
Okay. I like the point about not positioning encounters because yeah, I mean most stuff can happen pretty much anywhere, and one way I like to imagine sessions or adventures, whatever, is from the point of view of the party telling stories about
Mhm.
it later on. And
Mhm.
so there I was in the middle of nowhere with there I was at 33 degrees latitude and 45 degrees longitude,
Right,
and
right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. It kind of loses something, doesn't it?
oh yeah.
You know, I think you've hit a really important thing there, which is what the party is doing now, and I really think this should be true in any game. What the party is doing now in the present will be a legend in the future. Maybe not a big legend, but a legend. And people are going to remember it, and they're not going to remember it exactly as it happened, because that's not the way the transmission works. But if you want to say,
I mean,
if you want, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to say after that last game, Lisa Renia, I think they remember that the time we blew up their entire town.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I once had a DM. Actually, he was actually pretty good about it, but I just got frustrated with a fountain and destroyed it. And of course, it turned out it was like made out of solid diamond or something like that.
How did you get
And
frustrated by with a fountain?
I have no idea. This was probably in 1979, so it was a while ago.
Okay.
Um, but I will go back and I will say that sort of to loop back to the idea of you can do whatever you want. Another way of doing whatever you want is when you don't know what it is that you're doing. And when I first started playing, and I think my first game was in December of 1978, none of us knew what we were doing. It's interesting. I saw an interview with a couple of the guys from Wizards of the Coast, and they said basically the same thing. Like the first book that they got was the monster manual, and they just deduced what was going on from that. Um, I had a DM that had never played. None of the three players had ever played, and we just did stuff that today you go, you can't do that. Boy, did we have a blast, because we could just do whatever we wanted, and if it seemed reasonable, it
Yeah, I think
you
I
know,
think that's still my favorite way to play.
yeah, you just do it. And the tough part for players is you have to accept the consequences. It's a it's a it's it's more of a fantastical game than a fantasy game,
Mhm.
if that makes sense. You can't just do things necessarily. There's got to be a way to do things. We're back to the whole DM saying you can try. You know, um, it isn't like saying, "Well, I want to fly." It's like, "Well, go ahead and jump off a mountain and see how that works." You know. but that would be silly. What player could say that? Um, but yeah, back at the very beginning when you did not really know what the limitations were, you just had. I also killed my uncle's character in the very first game I played, which unfortunately still gets mentioned a lot. Um, but I could do it. Now today I'd be thinking about, I don't know about party dynamics, you know. Back then, no, you just did it. Um, but anyway, the the idea of Northlands is simply I want something that I'm going to enjoy DMing. I want to remove all the obstacles to me enjoying it. I want to remove as many of the obstacles as I can to communicating the world to my players. And in a game where you set up, literally set things that have to happen, um, that's just not the way it's set up. It's set up as a culture more than anything else. It's not highly structured. It's really, which is really kind of ironic because the reasons that the Vikings went to England was that it was the best administratively run country in Europe at the time and the wealthiest. And poor old Ethelred the Unready gets terrible press because he kept buying them off. Okay, there was no other country in Europe that could have bought them off. He was wealthy, the tax structure was incredible. He could give them 20,000 pounds of gold.
But it's not very
Maybe it wasn't the
sustainable.
best policy, but he could do it, you know. So it's a game where I try to meld sort of the rapaciousness, the the adventurousness, just the drive of Scandinavian society, and at the same time, the Anglo-Saxons, who again, remember, are their cousins. The languages at that point were probably mutually intelligible. Um, uh, the Anglo-Saxons are a more settled people. They have larger political units. Their cultural institutions are larger and stronger. You put those two together, and you have a potential not just to get back to the factions idea. Uh, you have the potential for strife within the society. What if you're a Catholic who doesn't like the fact that your king has been excommunicated? What if you're a bishop who has been told there aren't going to be any more bishops after you die?
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier about factions cannot be monoliths. You have to. There's always going to be different opinions in there.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I understand the purpose of factions, and it really is just I think in a lot of ways in the sort of the quote rules for factions, it's really just to help people think about the fact that these things do exist, and you can categorize them, and you can describe them. Um, and maybe it's just all the historical crap that I went through, but it's like I don't even think about it like that. I just go like, oh, of course, the church is going to have an you see these battles throughout history. There's a reason why the Lord Chancellor of England for 400 years was always a member of the church. First of all, he could read and write. That's kind of the big one. Secondly, was he had connections outside the country. So there's always going to be those kinds of factions, and there would be other people that wanted to be chancellor, and it wasn't going to work. But that didn't stop them from trying to get rid of the chancellor. So anyway, it's just if I can get some of that flavor across so that people think, oh, okay, technically I know this isn't a real place in time, but it could have been, then I would call that a success.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the goal of most fiction, isn't it? It's like, yep, I can see this happening. The rules might be different, the physics might be different, but you could put yourself in there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I guess one of the things, like I said, I haven't chosen who the big bad is. Or maybe there'll be multiple big bads, but the problem that I have with that is that if you're at level 3 and you're thinking about level 1, you're missing level 2. You're not looking at what's in between. You tend to get fixated on sort of the higher stuff, and again, that's not going to change. I mean, world those kind of scenarios, to me, I don't think at least um, make you interact with the society and culture,
Besides, I
if
think
that makes sense.
at a world scale, I think having except at very specific points in history, I would add having okay, this is the worldwide bad guy. This is the
Mhm.
it kind of feels a bit weird, but because what you've got is really a more complex network of opponents and allies and things like that.
Mhm.
There's always pushing and pulling. You don't have like I don't know. If you're running a campaign based on the adventures of King Arthur, having I don't know Morgan Le Fay or Mordred or I don't know, name some other. If you're playing a Robin Hood campaign, it makes sense to have the Sheriff of Nottingham as a big bad guy. A bad guy for the entire setting would be a bit weirder.
Well, I think one of the other things that I think is always problematic with the big bad guy is even big bad guys, you know, need to delegate,
True, yeah,
you know. So, not everybody. I mean, if you look at a James Bond film, Blofeld always has henchmen,
true, yeah.
and it is. I think it's a good idea to have to fight your way past the henchmen to get to the bad guy. But if you think about it, the larger the threat is from the bad guy, the more layers of henchmen there's going to be.
And definitely, even if you take James Bond doesn't know about Blofeld right away. Even if you look
Right,
at the
right,
latest remakes, I think he only finds out about him 2 or 3 movies in.
right, right. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from. Okay, we'll get to that in a second, but we do have a question from R. Do you use hex grids?
It doesn't really matter to me. I don't care. I mean, I right now because I'm playing on electronically a lot. You can use a grid, but I grew up. I mean, when I started playing, they were still using wilderness terrain from Outdoor Survival, the game, which hexes.
Okay.
And I think I still have a lot of hex terrain around. Um, no, but then a lot of it is, I think a lot of it is about visualization, and if you say to me that I'm in front of him or I'm next to him or I'm behind him or something like that, that probably has more meaning for me in a conceptual way than positioning them correctly. At least in sort of like the tactical level. On the big level, I don't use anything. I wouldn't use anything. If you were talking about going from, I don't know, London to York, I know roughly. Again, this is if you know your background, um, you know roughly how long it's going to take. You know what the roads are like, or you know where they're not there anymore. That kind of thing. You have an idea. And I guess that's the other thing that's behind Northlands is that this is in a very real way. This is nobody is ever going to create this except me, um, because it reflects what I like and know. And knowing is maybe you can't divorce that. So, if somebody was an electrician and wanted to DM and they wanted some kind of a map, would they do an electric schematic? Why wouldn't they? They're
If it makes sense
familiar
to
with
them,
it. They
yes.
can hold it in their heads. It's whatever speaks to you, whatever works to you for you, you know?
Speaking for myself, so I don't even use maps that much. It's like, yeah, you get there, or you get there, but something happens. But I don't usually worry about distance and so on. I mean,
Yeah.
just
It's
follow the
about
story.
it's about the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm thinking,
Yes.
what is, okay. So ask yourself in Four Horsemen, The party is going through some part of the Black Forest, right? What is more important, that you know exactly where you are in this particular part of the Black Forest, or that Swedish cavalry is suddenly sweeping down on you and you're surprised? That is what's really far more important.
Yep, totally agree
You
with
know?
that.
Yeah.
I was laughing because Dungeon Matron just mentioned that in reply to your electronic schematic thing, Daffyd would. Yeah, Daffyd definitely would do that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm sure. I'm sure David would have everything put together with a schematic.
And I'm
I'd,
pretty sure
I'd
it would
like to
have
see I'd like
LEDs
to
as
see a
well.
city map done by David. That would just be a nightmare for us, for us non-electronic people. Yeah,
It would be pretty cool though.
yeah. But
Okay.
if it worked, why not?
Yeah, I mean, if it makes as long as it makes sense for the person who made it, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah,
And yeah, okay, we had another question from Dungeon Matron. Are the three levels of yeah? Oh, David heard it. Hi, David.
yeah.
So let's see, where were we? Yeah.
Uh,
Are the three levels different for the players than for the DM?
I mean, the definitions aren't. The definitions are the same. But I think what you're actually aiming for is that the DM should know level one before they start.
And we're talking
The
about the
DM may know
high level
some.
concept, yeah?
Yeah, yeah. The DM may know some of level three, but they should also not know a lot of level three. And level two, uh, level obviously the players will get to know level one as they play, right? Um, I I suppose the DM should know a little bit of level two, just in the sense of what are the logical sounds bad. What are the reasonable mm,
We're still talking about
results?
tabletop RPG players, yeah?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was wondering where reasonable came in.
Yeah. Well, I guess the point is that if you're going, is that you want your players to go from one to two,
So
right?
going for the possible ways they're going.
Yeah. I
Okay,
mean, tendencies, again, because it's a party, you should at least get some, you're going to know what they're interested in. And you can at least somewhat plan for that, but it's very hard to say, oh, this is that kind of party. So they're going to do this. So I should spend several hours prepping for that.
I mean, that is kind of a soft railroading kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't, I think pretty much every party, uh, well, first of all, every party is different. But secondly, I think even within a game, sometimes parties just make a total left turn. And, if you're the DM and you've prepared something, you're just left, you're just left hanging. You're like, uh, and, look, it wouldn't phase Scotty. It would probably phase me. Even in Northlands, it would probably phase me. I'd be like, yeah, give me a couple minutes, you know?
Yeah, I can
Um,
imagine. So I can just picture the scene. It's like you've got your notes and you've got this journey planned out, and the players will be like, "Nope, we're just going to set fire to London
yeah,
because that's
yeah,
what we do."
yeah. And then you're kind of like, okay, I can tell you exactly what my brain would do, which is my brain would then go, okay, that's not weird. I'd be like defensive in the sense of, well, that's not weird. The Vikings did actually burn London at some point. Um, uh, but okay, when did it really burn? Well, the big fires in 1666. How did that work? Right. So that you can give some kind of a description, and maybe you don't do it the same way, but I'd be totally, totally cool with just ripping off what happened in 1666 and placing it in the year 1000.
Oh,
I'd
stuff.
be right down to, they set a fire in Pudding Lane in the city of London, and it went, I'd be fine with just describing it exactly the same way it happened 666 years later, you know. But again, I mean, I can do that because it's Northlands and it's based on what I like. So um,
I mean, it definitely helps
it
that
makes
you're
it a little
familiar
easier.
with the foundation.
Yeah, yeah. But again, I really want to emphasize that if you're going to build a world, build a world that you are already somewhat familiar with. It and also don't be surprised. Like you can call it whatever you want, you can do whatever you want in it. But I think you would be surprised at some point you look at it and you go, oh, this is this part of me coming through. Not just that I've created it, but this is my interest in, this is going to sound ridiculous, dog breeding.
Okay.
Dog breeding shows up in, you're a dog breeder. It shows up in your D&D world. Is that good? Yes, that's great because you're enthusiastic about dog breeding. You'll work it in. You'll think about it from different perspectives. The party will go, what the hell is dog breeding doing? And they'll be perplexed and try to find answers. And that's what you want. You want to engage them. And if it's something as, I was going to say as weird as dog breeding, but I don't mean that. I mean, it's weird in sort of the normal D&D game. I've never heard of dog breeding being used in D&D game, which means somebody should use it in a D&D game.
I would be
Yeah.
very surprised if no one has used it. But
Yeah, somewhere.
how do you feel about things that you have no answer for?
Um, the answer is magic. Um, it's kind of an interesting thing. I especially as a historian doing this in a historical world or a pseudo historical world, you want to have answers.
Hmm.
But I have to keep reminding myself that historians don't know all the answers either. Um, and I mean, there are basic things that we still don't know. Uh, and certainly archaeologists would tell you, no, we know almost nothing. Everything changes every single day.
Yeah, I'm thinking
So
things
it
about.
doesn't, in a sense, it doesn't bother, the concept doesn't bother me, you know? Um,
Yeah, what I was thinking
but
was something
rolling with
like
it is tough.
I was thinking something like the Northern Lights, but maybe not something because more or less we know why the Northern Lights happen,
Right,
for example.
right.
But phenomena like that in game that you might not have an answer prepared to, you just put it as a cool backdrop effect.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing I would say is level one, and you just kind of throw out some crap about, oh, that's Bifrost opening up. Do you have to explain it any more than that? I don't know that you do. I mean, even if you start stealing stuff from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, why not? Everybody gets it. It's like we were talking about with Tolkien and Peter Jackson. Everybody is like, oh yeah, that's what they looked like. Well, in the public consciousness, that's what they looked like.
Okay,
So
okay. I get you. So basically, if the answer doesn't exist, the in-game narrative will make something up about it. Okay,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I like that.
See, it's tougher. See, something like the Aurora Borealis is easy because it's ephemeral and doesn't affect level 3 at all.
It's just there.
The problem that you have, the problem that you have with with specifics, like when you don't know, is it affects what happens immediately. Aurora Borealis, no, that's easy. You can make up anything. It doesn't really matter. I mean, literally, you could say, even in Northlands, oh, it's very simple. Those are aliens entering the atmosphere.
Okay.
And then everybody goes, "Oh my God, there are aliens." I'm like, "Yeah, but you don't know they're aliens. It's just you see strange craft in the air, and that's all you say."
Now, on the other hand, something like Mount Vesuvius, for example, and yes, we're mentioning the Romans again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that would definitely have a really immediate
well,
effect. Yeah.
one of the things that I remember years and years ago, I was in a game, and in the middle of the game, I came across something about the Roman Empire, um, as one does, and it was about an industrial complex in southern France, outside of Arles, that just blew my mind because what it was so there's an escarpment north of Arles, And what the Romans had done, and people didn't notice this, apparently.
Was that Gygax?
Huh?
Was that Gygax?
Sorry? Yes, Gygax is here finally.
Hey.
Now he's on my lap. Um, they were using the water flow over the edge of the escarpment, and they had built a stepped series of mills, like 10 or 12 of them, and there were pairs. They were on both sides of the stream, and they were using these mills to do a variety of things. They were grinding grain, right? And the grain that was then transported to Arles, where it fed the Roman garrison as well as some of the citizens. They were using it via trip hammers to full cloth, so in the cloth making process. And the very bottom ones were also using it. So the bottom pair
Mm-hmm.
were also using the power of the water to work a bellows in a smithy.
Nice.
So I think, by any standards, this was a huge undertaking, a huge industrial complex. They were using the same motive power to, do multiple things. And it absolutely took me, took me aback. I was like, holy crap, that is marvelous. And since then, they found several other places. Now that they know what to look
Okay.
for, they found several other places where the same thing is happening or was happening. And
Hey, hello, buddy.
uh, um, the fact that his name is Gygax doesn't get him special treatment. So the I tried to do this in a game, and it happened to be a game where that sort of thing wasn't going to happen. But that's the sort of thing that I have held on to forever, and will probably show up in Northlands at some point. Because the great thing about doing a historical game is you can pull from all of history. It just has to be possible, and you have to be consistent. You know, and that is the hardest thing, is the consistency. And also, it can't outrage me in terms of its ahistoricity. I can't. It isn't like these Vikings are going to, settle all of North America or something like that. I can't do that.
So no backscabbers and stuff like that.
No, well, they didn't have the population to do it anyway. They couldn't even take over all of England, for God's sake. So, I mean, they couldn't really. I mean, they took over Normandy, but they didn't. They didn't replace the. They didn't actually replace the population. They were just the ruling class, and eventually got absorbed. So, and the same thing in parts of Ireland as well. So, yeah, you have to, even as you're playing with the possibilities, you have to remain reasonable. But that also helps lead your players on, because anybody who plays in Northlands knows the way I think. It's kind of metagaming, I suppose, in a way, but if you know the way I think, if you know I really get excited about looking at, the Roman thing is called Barbagal. It will not surprise you if you come across that somewhere in what later becomes Derbyshire.
Right.
It won't surprise you. Whether you want to do something with it or not is, of course, totally up to you.
Excuse me.
So,
Okay. So let's see. So Slurgical and Dungeon Matron are saying DMing for teenagers, you must be ready for that very thing. I think they're going back to the flexibility in flipping around.
yeah,
My son
yeah.
and his friends went into a town and they never got to quest. Instead, they just broke laws and destroyed the town as they were chased out.
Well, yeah. Well, and that could, I mean, you could do that in Northlands, but you would also have to then, totally possible,
But
right?
then you have consequences, right?
That you have consequences, and those consequences are not good. It's like in post Civil War America, um, that was a lesson that was ultimately learned by the more successful quote, bad men, right? Like the Jameses and the Youngers. Both of them enjoyed success for a significant period of time, and then at some point, both of them wandered into it, not wandered in. They went into a town to rob it, to rob the bank, or
Hmm.
in at least one of these cases, they got too big for their britches and decided they would rob two banks simultaneously. I believe that's called
Overachievers.
hubris.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the townsfolk said, "No, that's not going to happen," and they shot them to pieces. So, that when they pulled Emmett, I said the Younger gang, I meant the Dalton gang. When they pulled Emmett Dalton, who was the sole survivor, out of the street, he had been shot 14 times. He actually survived, but he had been shot 14 times. So
Yeah, that's not
it
good for
wasn't
him.
really worth it. But they all realized at that point, oh, we're not going to get away with this forever. The James gang tried to do something very similar in Northfield, Minnesota. They got just shot to pieces. It's fun. If you ever go to Northfield, Minnesota, which is just south of Minneapolis, you can go to the local historical society, and in the local historical society, stapled to a piece of cardboard is a piece of the ear of one of the James
What?
gang that was shot off during the raid.
Okay.
So they're still very proud of it. We defended our town. Those guys aren't going to come in and steal our stuff. So there are consequences to your actions. If you did something like that in Northlands, oh yeah, that would be a problem. And by the way, you know it this I think is always a problem for DMs is if your party is doing stuff that you don't like, they deserve to at least get a warning.
Hmm.
But at some point, you do have a responsibility, I suppose I want to say, to the game itself, but also to yourself, because all you are is a player with special abilities, right? And you put a lot of time and effort into this. And if if they aren't willing to accept um, the repercussions, I suppose you might say, TPKs happen. Um,
Yeah, I wouldn't even
you may
care
not
when.
want to. You'll never want to. Let's put it that way. But what are you going to do?
Well, I mean, where I see it is that I interpret most player actions as, let's see what happens if I do this. So, yeah,
Yeah.
you're going to be presented with results. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, this comes down to the communication, right? It's like, and you can, I could in session zero, I could say you know, to the party, okay, you need to understand that there is a slow acting but robust justice system. Okay. So if you, for example, and I think this is perfectly reasonable, if you were to kill someone, you would not necessarily, because there's no such thing as jails, right? You would not necessarily be executed for murder, but you would be required to pay a certain amount of money to usually the bereaved family, right? Um, and if it became clear that you were doing stuff, you went into a town and burned down the whole town, there wouldn't be an intermediate stage. The king would declare you an outlaw, i.e., outside of the law, at which point you could be killed by anybody.
Yeah.
Well, it
Well,
doesn't mean that you're going to be killed right away. It just means that sooner or later it's going to catch up with you.
yeah, people are going to come at you eventually. And we have a
Yeah.
question from Dungeon Matron about this. The question is, when does player agency and cohesiveness clash? I'm not sure. I'm not sure they clash, to be honest. Because I mean,
Yeah.
players
I mean,
can't do anything. It's just there are going to be after effects. That's all it means.
yeah. I mean, I do think, like, kind of like I just said, I think a lot of that depends on the clarity of the communications, right? It's all about setting expectations. If you make it clear, you can do whatever you want, but you need to think about it in the context of a world. I mean, this is not something that you face in a one shot, right? In a one shot, I don't know, you can kill everybody, and it doesn't really matter. But in a world, if you push the world's going to push back. You know, there's an equal and opposite reaction, basically. Um, and if that is not where you want to play, if you don't like that, if that's not your preferred playing style, then you shouldn't be playing in a world. You should be playing one shots and modules, which are basically extremely task oriented, and you just get the job done. Um, so it's largely about fitting the world and the players too. You know.
But yeah, but again, I don't see it as a break in player agency because player agency is all about what the players can do. Like if the player wants to do
Yeah.
something, they can still do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think in the starkest possible terms, you can say you can do anything you want, and that includes dying. And then when people get upset about that, you're kind of like, but do you want to be an adventurer or do you want to sit in an armchair at home?
Or raise some cattle or something like that.
Yes, yes, be a dog breeder. Um,
Yeah.
but I think that's a really important thing is you're not going to if you're going to go out adventuring, you need to go out adventuring, and there needs to be some risk involved. And some of the I just played in a one shot where the best I mean it was a good adventure anyway, but the absolutely best thing about it was that for at any moment I felt I could die. That was the best thing. Just it kept me on my toes. I was,
Excuse me.
I was excited for every moment. I could have died at any time. That was great. Thank God I didn't. But if I had, I would have gone to my death going, well, I did my best and it was exciting and what more can you ask for?
Yeah, I mean, if you have an adventure which with no, it's practically no stakes if you don't feel any kind of risk or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and again, it's an interesting thing because depending on the player as well as the party, you can, as opposed to, so for an example, this is a sort of a goes back to that economic thing that I was talking about earlier. In Anglo-Saxon England, there were mints. Basically, there were multiple mints around the country where they minted silver pennies. Nobody did anything with gold or anything. There wasn't a lot of gold. But the silver pennies were basically the coin of the realm, so to speak. Um, the king had his own mint, but also various people in various parts of the country were licensed to do their own minting, and periodically they would then pull in all the pennies and remint. Um, so it was a good deal for the minter. But it turns out that if the guy running the mint screwed with it,
Hmm.
they didn't kill him. Later on, counterfeiting and basically counterfeiting would become a
Capital offense,
capital
yeah.
crime. But, yeah, but they didn't do that because a huge part of these societies was public shaming.
Oh, okay.
So the answer was if a mint master called in the silver pennies, melted them down, recoined, and took more than he was supposed to, or if he, only put 9/10 as much silver in the pennies as he should have, um, they didn't even take his license away. What they did do was cut off his right hand and nail it to the door
Oh shit.
so that if you went there, you knew what you were getting into. And he was not a marked man, but who's going to trust that guy, right? And there's this hand just stuck on the door or on a fence post or but in front of his premises. And so he was shamed in front of everybody, you
Yeah.
know. And there are recorded instances of mint masters having this done. It didn't happen very often, which is again sort of a testimony to the robustness of Anglo-Saxon administration.
Also
Um,
the whole having your arm cut off kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that is not, nobody wants that, right? But there are cases where somebody did it, got caught, and they cut off his hand and nailed it up. And the shame that accompanied that on several occasions you couldn't really commit suicide. If you committed suicide, that was really a horrible thing.
Yeah, that's
But
like
but his
murder skill
family,
itself. Yeah.
yeah, his family killed him because he had brought so much shame on the family,
Okay.
and they were not fined the usual amount. So, yeah, so public shame is a huge deal, and that continues well up into the 17th century.
That late. All right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you were, this is what being put in the stocks is all about, you know, or being dragged through town on a hurdle, or being forced to wear what they called the scold's bridle, which is this wonderful
Yeah.
iron cage that fits over your head,
With the
and
spike in
it
the
has,
tongue. Yeah.
yeah, they don't usually bore through the tongue. They save that for bigger things, but it holds your tongue down. It's extremely uncomfortable after a while. So you were being punished for being a gossip monger, basically, a bad influence on society. So that goes on really up. I mean, you can find it in the 18th century, even early 18th century. So
Mhm.
so punishment comes in a variety of different ways. So that's you know killing somebody. You could also be reduced to slavery. That was another thing that could happen. So, but anyway, it's just an example of how things were different and how you can play with it within the confines of a campaign. If a party walks up to a door and there's a hand nailed to it, that's they're going to be somewhat interested in it. You would think, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that they would jump to the conclusion that it was the result of a fraud investigation, but
No, no, they not. But if they ask, they would get
there you go.
told that. And now you're approaching level two.
Yeah. The other thing
Like especially, see, now my brain's going. Now I'm
okay.
like, especially if it turned out that Ethelred, that this occurred because he was ordered to provide X number of silver pennies to be given to the Vikings to buy them off, and therefore by doing this, in a sense, he shamed the king as well because the king gave the Vikings underweight coin, which is only going to
Ah,
piss
okay.
them off. Okay,
And
actually,
also,
he'd probably be executed for that,
yeah, because at that point it
but
becomes a case of
now you're
national
really into
security
level
kind
two.
of thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Now you're up there, right? But and you can you know how long is that going to take to say? That's not going to take very long at all. It's not a tangent or anything. It's just why is the hand nailed to that dude's door? Well, it's because of this and this. Oh, okay. Suddenly you know about the economy of the kingdom. You know how the whole thing, how that part of it works.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about the ear you mentioned earlier. It's like, can imagine party goes into a tavern. Why is there an ear stuck to the bar?
Mhm.
Well, that's from the last guy who tried to rob us.
That's right. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. It's the same kind of thing. And again, when you were doing stuff in the Holy Roman Empire, it's the same kind of thing. It is such a chaotic situation. That's the other thing is the key is not whether or not you define really, in a sense, stuff in level two or in the Holy Roman Empire. It's the fact that your players don't know any of it. So everything that you give them is new, and so you have to be very careful. You can't overfeed them, right? You can't
Yeah,
put a funnel
definitely.
in their mouth and just start pouring stuff in.
I mean, depending on where they're starting off, I do give them a bit more or less information. Say, for
Hmm.
example, if someone is starting out as a lower level noble or a lower level knight, they do have some more information about.
Hmm.
But someone I don't know. random gong farmer isn't going to have that much of a breadth of information.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, and again, if you're working for an Imperial Knight, it's not like you went around and discovered this stuff, like you asked this stuff. It's just that just by being around an Imperial Knight, you would know
Yeah,
some
yeah.
of
I mean,
this.
you probably have been born and raised in that sphere of influence, so you probably know a lot of that information.
Right.
So then Demetrian is asking, what happens if you don't pay the brother? Brother.
Well, first of all, in a medieval brothel, well, again, this depends on how pseudo-medieval you want to be. Because if it's after 1500, you might just get you might get syphilis, and that's enough of a downside. But if it's before that, the strain of syphilis that was around in Europe was much more benign. So maybe there isn't as much of a downside. Well, if you don't pay at the brothel, the other thing is you can't go back.
Or, you get dead by pimps.
Yeah, yeah. Well, interesting. You're not talking about a lot of brothels, certainly in the actual medieval period. Not a lot of brothels.
On the other hand, if you're talking about brothels in the 15th and 16th century, you might piss off some really highly positioned characters.
Mhm.
For
Mhm.
example, at some point, bishops and the clergy could have stakes in a brothel. They were not
Mhm.
supposed to go there, but it was okay to own it and get rent and whatever. So yeah, if you don't pay the ladies, then I don't know, the cardinal's guards are going to pay a visit or something.
Well, so in London, on the south side of the Thames, is an area called Southwark,
Hmm.
and Southwark was technically not within London, right? It was on the other side of the Thames. You had to go across London Bridge to get there. The result was that it wasn't subject to the same laws, basically. The biggest landowner in the area was the Bishop of Winchester, and Southwark became known for a variety of fringe entertainments. We'll call it that. So this is where the bear baiting pits were.
Okay.
This is where the theaters were. The Globe Theater is in
Oh, the
Southwark.
theaters.
Okay, because theaters are questionable when they finally show up. Um, but that's also where the bathhouses were, which by the 15th century really had kind of become brothels. The nickname for them was the stews, as in
Okay.
like you're in the water, right? Um, but the prostitutes that lived in Southwark were referred to as Winchester geese because their premises were all owned by the Bishop of
Of
Winchester.
Winchester. Okay.
They all paid rent to the bishop. Yeah,
What's that tiny thing nailed to the brothel?
yeah. I don't know. Yeah, and I don't know how they paid their rent. Okay. But by the way, sorry, that just leads me to something else, talking about the stews and the bathhouses.
All right.
The whole thing about medieval people were just dirty as
Mm-hmm.
they dirty as shit. They weren't. There are bathhouses everywhere. Everybody was relatively clean. I mean, it's a pre-industrial society. The whole thing about people being dirty, and it really only comes in about the time of the Tudors. So, about 1500. Medieval society actually placed pretty much of a premium on cleanliness.
Wait, 1 second. Do you mean that people were clean up to the Tudor times, or was it that they were clean both
Yes.
before and after, but the Tudors said the other guys were dirty?
Yeah, the Tudors and Stuarts are like that's the most unclean period in history.
Okay.
I, yeah, it's really odd. So, well, what happens is that at the beginning, um, the medieval church made a point of emphasizing that your body was the temple of God, and you had to take care of your temple,
Okay.
basically. And cleanliness, it was understood, was an important part of that. I'm not talking about like medical practices or anything, but but people were as clean as they could be. Now, admittedly, I mean, if you're a peasant and you've been working in the fields all day and you live in a very small area, you're not taking a bath every day. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that if you got the chance, you would clean yourself. Okay. That changed about 1500, and I've never really heard an explanation as to why. But it hung on through the 1500s and the 1600s, and really it's only the sort of the rationality of the Enlightenment when it really starts to hit around 1700 that people start to get clean again.
That's super
Um,
weird.
yeah, it's very strange. I I really don't know the reason why. Um, but yeah, but no, again, it's sort of the pseudo medieval thing. It's like mm, from again, nobody's got hot and cold running water, so the it's not like they can just go in and wash their hands after a day in the fields. You can if you have a good water source, you can do that, but the sort of stark, oh, the Middle Ages was filthy idea just doesn't. I was going to say it just doesn't wash.
Okay. Oh yeah, another thing I wanted to ask you about world building. How do you feel about adding festivals and feasts and holidays and so on to the setting? Because the way I see it is that that hits both the third level, because there is
Mhm.
a festival going on around you, and at the same time it also hits the first level because that's like what are these people celebrating? Why do they celebrate it? Why is it important?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's a good way. Things like festivals are a good way of doing two things. One is they actually introduce players to level three. They introduce you to the because festivals in this period are basically recognition, commemoration, whatever you want to call it, of things that occur in level three.
Okay.
So if it's a harvest festival, look, you don't know how this works, right? You just pray that you planted your crop and it's going to be bountiful, and so you don't starve to death by the end of winter, right? But you don't understand necessarily how it all works. You understand, there were already resting fields and things like that, but you don't get the whole thing. They don't know about nitrates, for example. Although they are spreading human waste on the fields already to get the nitrate level back up. They do get that. But but you know, the fact that harvest takes place at a certain time of the year and you have to celebrate that, you have to commemorate that. There are religious festivals that of course tell you about um, your belief system, which is certainly a level 1 kind of thing. Um, and in fact, the whole idea of months uh, is really well, I mean, the Romans did it, but for the Anglo-Saxons, months weren't really a thing. It was really seasons.
Okay.
Um, and I mean, eventually they sort of absorbed sort of the Roman idea, but initially, at least, um, you would have, I never can remember the name of it, but let's put it this way: what we would call the winter season, and we tend to think of seasons in terms of 3 months. They would probably think of it more like two.
Okay.
Um, yeah, but it was all kind of fuzzy, you know. So summer would start in May and probably go into August, which it's 2 months. It might be three. It kind of depends on the weather. Um, Same thing with religious festivals. They tried to keep it to similar days, but sometimes they moved. Think about it. Easter still moves today,
Hmm.
you know. Um, so it was not all as cut and dried. We have tended and when I say we, I just mean later people, have tended to put specifics into it where specifics did not in fact exist, you know. But pulling in festivals and what's the one that there's one that I think is really, oh, beating the bounds. This is something that's still done in a lot of areas in England. So
Okay.
um, parishes, right? So the local divisions of the Church of England, but then of course it was Catholic. Uh, uh, there's divisions between them, right? And there was a tradition during Anglo-Saxon times that you would essentially when spring started, you would go out and do what's called beating the bounds, which is a religious procession that goes around the borders of the parish. And this is a holdover from a pagan practice. And when I say pagan, I just mean non-Christian, of marking out your protected territory.
Okay.
Right? So it was specifically religious, and it was to say, we are protected. We within these boundaries are protected by, well, originally it would have been whatever local spirit, if there was a well, there was a good chance there was a spirit living in it, whatever. But later on, it would be whoever the saint was that the church was dedicated to.
Okay.
Okay. And this would be a major, major thing, because that helped to enforce not just good over evil, but also prosperity within the bounds. Like if you let evil in, you would suffer.
Hmm.
Okay. So when Henry VIII disestablished the various monasteries and essentially created the Church of England, most of that went away. The monasteries were suppressed. Um, Today, well, even by the 18th century, it would have been a situation where the village priest would have gone out with, oddly enough, the boys, and there's a reason for that. But the boys of the parish would go with him, and what they would do is they cut sticks and literally beat the bounds. They would just go out and
Okay.
tap it to show where the boundary of the parish is. And you think, oh, the boys are going just because it's a chance to, you know, hit things. But it isn't. It's so that they know where it is. They're the boys. They can pass it along to the next generation. So it has an educational aspect as well as a religious aspect. And that is still done in a lot of places in England. And they've been doing it for over 1,000 years. It's, again, pre-Christian and has moved along. So it used to be a much bigger occasion. If you'd been doing this 1,000 years ago, there would be a feast involved. There would be, again, sort of this invocation of the spiritual landscape. The monasteries would be involved. It would be a much bigger deal. So festivals, things like that, man, you can get all three levels into one occasion.
Yeah, I was wondering about it because I haven't seen many published campaign settings or words which use it. I know that Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is a big exception because they use them quite heavily. But other
Yeah.
than that, I don't remember many systems using that.
Well, one of the reasons that I did Northlands was that I could use sort of English folklore, because there's been more study of English folklore than anywhere else in the world. So there's just masses of sources. And it's about things like, and some of it is totally discredited at this point, uh, the one of the things that has gone away that used to be and still shows up quite a lot actually is the idea of a pre-Christian female-led fertility, the great goddess theory, which has pretty much been discredited now. But at the same time, it was such a beautiful source of material that it still shows up in things.
All right.
Um, So, you can draw on all of that. And I think even if again, it's a game. So it doesn't have to be accurate. It just has to be reasonable. It just has to be plausible.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as all the wheels sit together, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're in Malta and there's, how many religious processions are there going on there every week?
There's at least one a week, and there are explosions going on outside as we speak.
Yeah. No,
Yeah, the
and that's exactly right.
classic
It's one
explosions for
thing
Jesus. Yeah.
that, yeah, explosions for Jesus, exactly. But that's something that we've completely lost touch on in this pseudo medieval thing is like outside of going out into the fields and working again for 99% of the population, the thing that they carried around with them was this sense of their place in the world in a spiritual sense, and their vacation, their holidays were all religious holidays, and all of their events, except for paying rent, were religious events. So, in the sense that you can use that to draw a link, to sort of, again, pull people from level one to level two and potentially even level three, there, absolutely, you can do that in a medieval campaign without any. I mean, after all, by the time you get to the Four Horsemen, right, they're all killing each other in the name. Well, we all know that it's not that simple, right? But they're killing each other in the name of their interpretation
Yep.
of what's going on spiritually.
Also money, but mainly that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, lots of other things, right? Like
Yeah.
geopolitics as well, yeah,
It's
But
complicated.
yeah, that is something that we do not understand, especially in this country. We don't understand that on a sort of national, completely internalized level where it doesn't even you don't even think about it. I mean, in terms of the spiritual landscape, everybody in England in we'll say 1300 carries within them level three.
Okay,
It comes out at different times, but they always have level three with them.
that makes sense. Okay, and yeah, the other thing what it was how far in depth, like what do you think would be the most tiniest detail that you would put into your world building?
Hmm. Let's say this is not a tiny detail
Okay,
because there's no it is a tiny detail, but it's a tiny detail that's put in specifically to address a level three thing.
okay,
So both both Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian leadership, um, unlike many other places, had a formalized, uh, I guess what you might call a council to advise the king. And, this, again, it wasn't formal like the cabinet or anything like that. It was just
the king and his five best
people.
buddies. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and usually it was famous fighters, but sometimes there were priests involved. And, I mean, it was open because it wasn't overly defined. So later on, when you got to the Great Council in medieval England, it got pretty, you had to be a tremendously powerful noble to be in the King's Council. But early on, it wasn't like that. And one of the things um, that I set up is that in about 1300 there was a shift in world um, climatic conditions that is it's generally known as the Little Ice Age. And the smallest detail that I have thought about putting in Northlands is that the kid that comes up with the idea of
The movable type.
printing,
Okay.
basically, okay, that's small, but it's not small enough. And I'm counting as small. I'm counting as tenuous as well, right? Um, he lives in Bristol with his parents, and his uncle is a sailor, and his uncle is uh, specifically sails the North Atlantic. They have some Norse blood in them, and so his uncle is on ships that go to Scotland, the Orkneys, the Shetlands, the Faroes, all of which have been settled by this time and are basically Norse outposts, um, as well as Iceland, which is just in the process of being settled. And he brings back with him um, an older man from, I haven't decided if it's the Shetlands or the Orkneys, who essentially recognizes that the Little Ice Age is beginning. I mean, he doesn't call it the Little Ice Age or anything, but he says, like, I've lived there for decades and it's changing.
Winter is
This
coming.
is, yes, winter is coming. And um, so they bring back this older guy who then goes to wherever the king is. And again, kings tended to wander around a bit.
Yeah.
So, but their main places were like Winchester or Reading or somewhere like that. And he goes before the King's Council and just reports on this. Now, this is not. I have no idea how a party would ever interact with this, but it's somebody at a detail level, right? This kid in Bristol who has a link with someone who recognizes that a level 1 effect is commencing. And those are the kinds of things that I like to have because, and admittedly, they're for me. But if by chance anybody ever made that connection, that would be great. I mean, I think you have to have sort of the everyday fun of playing, but I think you also have to have those breakthrough moments. They're just like, oh my God, this is great.
I
And you
think,
never know when they're going to happen.
yeah,
I once had a total just flash of intuition and decapitated a gorgon from behind. Okay. I had no clues that that's what it was. There was nothing going on. It just something said, do that. And I did it. And it turned out to be great. And it was like, I remember it and it was 40 years ago. So if by chance you can get a moment like that, it's so worth that weird little connection that
nice.
I don't know, it's just really fun. A lot of endorphins start flowing.
And to be honest, it's also that's a lot of fuel for the rumor mill because a stranger goes to visit the king, a stranger with some strange information goes to visit the king. Sooner or later it's going to end up like a strange foreign wizard has visited the king, and then everything
Mhm.
started freezing up.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, yes, he instead of this old farmer from, you know, uh
Iceland or the
from the
Orkneys or whatever.
Shetlands. No, he becomes suddenly this incredibly powerful person who's come to threaten the king with eternal darkness or something like that. Or you could just keep it as it's getting colder, and maybe the king's council, maybe they send out maybe the party is one of the groups that they send to other different parts of the country to send it to northern Scotland, send it to Caithness, send it to the Western Isles, send it to Iceland, whatever. It doesn't really matter to say, have you guys noticed this?
Yeah,
Is this real? And suddenly climate change, in the year 1000, that kind of thing. But you can take whatever you want. If the party doesn't want to do that, then they don't have to do that. But it's there. I mean, there's nothing that's too outlandish, right? As long as you can make a reasonable connection. I
Okay.
mean, we know that there were people, applying the waters of the North Atlantic for hundreds of years,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
certainly long enough, especially in a culture that had to pay attention to things like seasons, wind, wave, water. Why wouldn't they have noticed it? And ultimately, the Little Ice Age is the thing that caused the abandonment of Greenland by the Norse settlers. I mean, Iceland hung on by its skin of its teeth.
Oh yeah,
Um,
totally.
so yeah, so it's that is just a tiny, tiny. It's not even an Easter egg, right? Because it's never going to hatch. But it's just something that you think about that it's a detail that probably goes nowhere.
But it is there.
But just by existing, it makes the world richer.
I like that. I'm really intrigued by this setting, so hopefully we will tell me more about it later, another time. But I think we're coming up to 2 hours and 30 minutes, and we should probably wrap this up soon. So, do you have
Yes, I
any?
have another game to play in a half an hour. So
Let you get ready then. Any closing thoughts before we go?
no, I mean, I think they're really important. I don't, the levels thing that I use, it's just a visualization thing. It doesn't really matter. Anybody should do whatever works for them. I think the one thing that, again, that since fifth edition came out, that they have said more of, which is, plan, sorry, define less. I think that's really good uh, as a bit of advice, but also make sure that as the DM, you're enjoying yourself. Don't build just for your players. Come up with stuff, use your interests. Um, yeah, I mean, if David wants to do everything as a schematic, why shouldn't he? You know, I'd play it just for I mean, I have no training in electronics at all. I would play it just for the novelty. You know, um,
Yeah, I'd play that too.
so yeah. So if I mean I tend to deal in historical stuff for obvious reasons, but there's no reason why you can't turn your crocheting into a DM adventure.
I mean, thinking about it, you could even, depending on how far you want to go, you could even take literally everything we just said about Northlands and turn it into a space opera.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. By the way, there is a book called Space Viking. So the last thing I was going to do is I was going to so the sort of general idea of a sort of codominium between the Scandinavians and the Anglo-Saxons is in a trilogy by Harry Harrison. The first book is called One King's Way, and
Okay.
then volume two is King and Emperor, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's the Hammer and the Cross, and then King and Emperor, and then One King's Way. So it's a pretty good trilogy. And then if you want to read some extremely accessible um, nonfiction on it, the best one I've read yet is called The Wolf Age,
Okay.
The Vikings, the Anglo-Saxons, and the Battle for the North Sea Empire. And it's by a Norwegian scholar named Tore Skaie. That's spelled Toreskeie.
I think it's easier if you send me the name later, and I'll put it up
Yeah,
in
I will
the
do that.
photos.
Uh, and just to prove that this is not just all coming out of my head, please remember that there was, in fact, a king who was the king of England, the king of Denmark, and the king of Norway. Um, so being the king of the North Sea was certainly possible. And it wasn't an accident that he's called the Great. So,
Okay, beautiful stuff. So, Tom, thanks again for this. This was super interesting, and yeah, I definitely want to hear more about the Northlands later on. Everyone else, thank you so much for watching. I'll be taking a break from streaming for a week or two, but we'll be back in mid-September. So, see you around. So, everyone, thank you so much, and Tom, thank you again.
sure
Bye.
thing. Bye.
Bye.